Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week for a couple different reasons. The first of which is to take my brain out of the mode of background work over the course of the week and move into the process of actually writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. That is reason number one. Reason number two is just to allow you, the viewer, who have come across this video for whatever reason has brought you here today, to gain some different insight into the assigned text for the week. So that is why I do these. This particular Sunday, September 24th, 2017, the 16th Sunday after Pentecost, our gospel lesson comes out of Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. Now, this one is a pretty commonly known parable. I think it's pretty commonly known. I like to think so. It's the parable. It's got some different names. Sometimes it's called the ungrateful servant. Sometimes it's called the generous landowner. Whatever you want to call it, but it's a parable that I think people have run into quite a bit. A little bit of where things have been going. Jesus is definitely moving towards Jerusalem by this point. We actually hear at the beginning of chapter 19, so a chapter ahead of this, that he's leaving the region of Galilee and moving towards Jerusalem. And then throughout 19, we have some different encounters that happen along the way. So Galilee's up in the north, Jerusalem's down in the south. He will arrive in Jerusalem at the beginning of chapter 21. That's the triumphal entry. So gospel narrative-wise, we're moving towards the end. We're getting towards Jerusalem and Passover and Holy Week and all of that stuff. So that's kind of where we are narrative-wise. Now, one of the things that's going on in the again leading up to this passage and to this parable, that's the word I'm looking for, is the encounter that Jesus has with the rich young ruler, or a rich young man, or young man, or rich guy that comes up and asks him, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus is like, "Well, what's in the law? What do you read there? Or what do you see in the commandments?" And sometimes it's which is the most important commandment, and all of that. And Jesus goes through and lists a bunch of them off, and then points out this guy's issue to him, that he's greedy. That's why he's rich, because he covets everything, and that's what's standing in the way of this guy encountering the glory and the joy of living in the reality of the kingdom now. And we hear that the guy goes away sad because he's so rich. There's a little bit more back and forth, and then Jesus is talking about entering the kingdom of heaven and that it's difficult for some. And then Peter asks the question of basically asking, "Hey, we've left everything to follow you. What do we get for that? Like, what's our reward?" And so Jesus is talking about that and a little bit of that, what's going on there. Gosh, I've been talking a lot and not really saying much, but he ends, and all of this is leading to this point. So the end of chapter 19, Jesus says, "Many who are first will be last, and the last will be first." And I bring that up because that bookends along with the end of this passage in verse 16. He says almost verbatim the exact same thing, that the last will be first and the first will be last. This idea of a great reversal in the kingdom, and what is important to us and who has status for us in our understanding in the world will be different in the kingdom, because the kingdom is so utterly other than the norm, than the status quo. That's kind of maybe this overarching point that I want to make. Sorry, I'm like, woo, I'm all over the map today. But anyway, all right. So Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. Jesus talking, and it's in response to what he's been saying to Peter and the disciples. "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them out into his vineyard. When he went outside about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went. When he went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock he did the same. And about 5 o'clock he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, 'Why are you standing here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard.' When the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, 'Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first.' When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day in the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last shall be first, and the first will be last." All right, so that's it. A few different little notes of some translation things that are going on here. We hear the usual daily wage in the original. That's a denarius. Denarius is the typical daily wage of just a hired laborer back in the time that Jesus was working here or was talking here. And so that's kind of that thing. And there's also the idea of hiring laborers. Now, there were certain situations where someone would have a quote unquote job and they would come day after day after day. And in that situation, they were not required to be paid like daily, like we see within this parable. But the idea of a day laborer and someone who's just going out looking for work, they would go into the marketplace. And this is something that still goes on in certain places today. I was in down in the Phoenix area a few years back, and driving around in the morning, and you would see crowds of migrant workers just standing on this or sitting on the street corner, just sitting there waiting for someone to pull up and hire them. And I remember asking the question of like, why are those guys sitting there? Why are they doing that? And whoever I was with told me that. And this is the exact same type of situation that's going on here in the parable and would have happened commonly in Jesus' time, that someone who was looking for work and did not have steady employment, did not have steady income, would go out just hoping to be hired. And you're kind of at the mercy of someone coming along and being like, "Hey, why don't you come and work for me, and I'll pay you what's fair." And so think about it, that not only is their well-being up for grabs, but if they're supporting a family, their family's well-being is up for grabs as well. And if they don't get hired, they're letting more than just themselves down; they're letting their families down, and the pressure that must come or must put upon them to have. So keep that in the back of your mind as you think about these laborers who have stood there all day and no one has hired them. So especially the ones who have made it to 5 o'clock and they're like, we got to go home empty-handed today. And then lo and behold, this guy comes along unexpectedly and hires them for an hour. And now it's interesting as we see the progression that there's less and less talk of what these guys are going to be compensated. The ones who are hired first, they agree you will receive what's expected. You will receive what's promised. And then when he goes out again a few hours later, he says, "Go in and I will give you what's fair." And then we hear that he does the same when he goes out again at noon and again at 3. And then when finally it gets to be 5 o'clock, or the last hour, the 11th hour, they talk by the number of hours in the original language. There's no talk of money. There's just go into the vineyard. Just go. And then so they go in. They're sent, or they're invited, however you want to look at it. And they work, and then we hear about the whole payment situation. Now, I want to back up just a little bit and talk for a moment about just the crazy nature of what's going on here. First of all, the landowner would never be the one who's going out looking to hire laborers. If he's the landowner, if he's got the wealth, he's sitting on top of the social pyramid of this family, of this organization, whatever you want to call it. He's going to have someone who's going to go out and hire the people. It's probably going to be the manager of the vineyard, not the owner, the manager, or the steward, or whatever that we hear about later. That's the person who's going to go out and hire the laborers. And he's going to go out and he's going to hire what he needs for the day. And then that's it. He's not going to go back out again. But yet we hear the guy goes back out again. And it raises the question of why does he keep going out? Now, is the landowner just bored and he's going out for a walk, and all of a sudden he sees these people and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing? Why don't you go work? Go to work. Go ahead." And So that's odd. But he would never keep going out, and he would never keep hiring more. It's a situation of what's his focal point, and um, and why does he keep doing this? Because if you read in it, it's his focal point is not the required labor for my vineyard. It's it's why are you idle? His focus is on the person, is on the individual. It's like, okay, well, I'll hire you, so go. I don't need you, but I'll hire you anyway, and I'll give you what's fair. And so that's a crazy situation of all of this that's happening. It's like it just makes kind of no sense whatsoever. But again, the kingdom of heaven rarely makes sense. So anyway, so we've got this going on throughout the day, and now we have this crazy situation of it's the end of the day. It's time to pay the laborers to give them what they're due, and we see this crazy situation of he pays the people who'd only been there for an hour first, and they get the daily wage. Seeing this, those who have been there longer go instantly into the mode of the way the world works, and oh, well, in 1 hour they earned an entire day's wage. How much are we going to get? We've been here for 4 hours, or we've been here for 7 hours, or we've been here all day. And lo and behold, they receive down the line. Everybody receives the same. The reward, the wages, the what's another word I could use? What they receive is the same regardless of how long they've been in there. And those who spent all day, and we hear them grumble about we've been here all through the heat of the day, and we've borne the burden of the day, and you've made them equal to us. That's the argument. And I love the way that the landowner responds. And he says, "Friend, I do you no harm." And then he goes on to talk about, are you envious because I am generous? Am I not free to do what I want with that which is mine? And there's always the question of who's who in this parable. And typically we tend to think of God being the landowner that goes out and hires them and then rewards them all the same. And I think there's some merit to that, but at the same time there's some things going on here that are like, I don't know. But in the end, I think what it comes down to, as I've really pondered on this text, it's the idea of fairness in our reckoning just doesn't count when it comes to the grace of God. And if we want to look at this as the wages or the reward or the denarius or the daily wage, whatever we want to say, if that's the grace of God, and I think that's a fair interpretation, that it's not fair. The thing about grace is freely given, and it's all or nothing, and it's all encompassing or it's not, and grace is free or it's not grace, and that's a bunch of different ways of saying that we are totally at the mercy of the generosity of God, of His willingness to claim us as His own, regardless of our flaws, because we're all flawed. None of us are deserving of what we get. It doesn't matter how hard we work at it. It doesn't matter how good we look, or if we follow the rules, or if we stay away from that which is bad. We're still broken. We're still flawed. It's deep within us. And the kingdom of heaven may be here, but there are still those things that stand in the way. And we see that those early hires, for them, it's the idea of fairness. That it's not fair that you give them what you gave us, or that you give us what you give them. It's not equal. We didn't work as hard, or they didn't earn it. We did, and we can't earn it. I think a lot about this in terms of the idea of who gets salvation, and whose judgment does it fall to about who the master will reward with what the master will reward. This is coming out a little bit strange, but that's, to me, the sensibility of this. The kingdom of heaven is so utterly other that we can't comprehend it, and we just can't wrap our heads around it. And there's something that's going to stand in our way of fully embracing it. And I think that's what sin does. Sin clouds our vision, clouds our ability to accept it, to be in it, however you want to say it. Just like that rich young ruler that in chapter 19 that I talked about at the beginning, that something stands in our way. And this is not to say that, oh, we can recognize that and we can overcome it. Again, the brokenness of that we embody, the brokenness that is part of us, will stand in the way. And that is why we need the Savior, Jesus Christ, who has redeemed the world, who has reconciled the world back to God. And what's interesting about this whole thing, and perhaps where we go, is the idea that maybe we have, and I think we're all guilty of it at one point or another, that I'm worthy of God's grace, or it's good that I have it. Maybe that's a better way to say it. It's good that I have it. They don't deserve it. And whoever the they is, they don't deserve it. But it's not up to us. God will have grace upon whoever God will have grace upon. And if that's everybody in the world and all creation, and yes, I know that sounds like universalism. If that's who God chooses to show his mercy and his grace to, that's not up to us. That's not a judgment call that we get to make. Whether we like it or not, it's not up to us. Now, on the flip side, if God chooses not to show mercy to someone, including us, again, that's not our judgment call to make. We don't get to sit in the judgment seat. All we can do is proclaim the grace of God made real through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and proclaim that good news. That is what we are called to do. I've gotten kind of long-winded on this, but to me, that's what this parable is about. That the kingdom of heaven brought to us through Jesus Christ, through the event of Jesus Christ coming into the world, the reconciling, redeeming work of Christ in the world, is so ultimately earth-shatteringly, reality-changingly other, we can't wrap our heads around it. And that's okay. I think God knows that. I think that's why Jesus spoke in parables. And yet, it is, I think it's a telling illustration of the generosity of God. And one final point, and I touched on this earlier, but I want to kind of wrap it up with this: that when the master says to one of the grumblers, "Friend, I do you no harm," that God's showing grace to someone else who maybe we think doesn't deserve it, or maybe we think doesn't deserve to be rewarded in the same way that we are. God's grace being shown to others does not harm us. That the grace of God is not like a piece of pie, or like a pie, that if someone takes a piece out of, there's that much less of God's grace to go around. That God's showing mercy and grace and love and acceptance, or whatever we want to say it, to someone else does not affect us in the least way, beyond maybe giving us something to celebrate because God's mercy has been shown. There we go. That's kind of where I'm going with this parable, with this gospel text. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, throw them down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. This one got long. My apologies for that. But hope you have a blessed week, and we will catch you next time.